Okay, welcome everyone to What Successful Startups Do Differently, the podcast where we talk with founders and growth leaders who are past the experimentation phase and now they're navigating the real world of scaling, customers, complexity, funding, and systems. And today I'm joined by Beth Ardner, Vice President of Growth at Gobekli. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Mark. It's nice to be here.
We're real excited to have you here. And Gobekli operates in the learning and employment record space, an ecosystem that's quietly becoming one of the more important foundations of future work. Beth, again, thanks for being here. I guess let's start with you. Okay. We had a pre-meeting and you described yourself as the momentum person, right? Can you
Yes,
explain your role and what that means day to day at Gobekli?
absolutely. Fun fact, after we got off that call, I was like, no, I've thought of the term I wanted, and it was the growth hacker.
Okay.
In VC parlance, I'm the growth hacker. And really what it means in a day-to-day sense at Gobekli is I am the person thinking about how do we get from where we are right now to full-scale deployment, broad-scale use based on the goals that we've set, and the goals that our VC folks have set for us, what they're looking to see come out of us.
Okay.
And that can take a lot of forms. That can take the form of just pure sales work. We're going out and who do I need to talk to? How do I convince them? What does a demo look like? What does a presentation look like? What conferences do we need to show up at? It's currently in the last couple of weeks taken the form of really evaluating grant opportunities and partnership opportunities, and how do we engage with momentum that's already in the space and make sure that we're plugging it in the right places to help people out. It also looks like having an eye on the product and thinking about what do our clients and our customers want out of what we're building and making sure that that's spoken into the development process.
Wow. So you're bringing up good point. So how much of your time, you mentioned partnerships and you mentioned product and you mentioned market discovery. How much of your time is spent in those different areas?
Geez, I like to say that my day is different literally every day. So it gets a little bit fun when you're in a startup space because you pivot very quickly depending on what needs to happen. Having said that, I would say my average week, we're talking about 50 to 60% is in partnership, outreach, connecting to folks in the space, being part of the conversations that are taking place to help do that. And then another 20% is probably spent on, the market itself, what's happening, staying up to date on. There's a lot of information coming out at a pretty rapid pace. And understanding, doing our research and our background work on spaces we need to go into that we're not as familiar with or that we don't have the background with on the team. And then the remaining 20% there is going to be product. And I say that with a little bit tongue in cheek because we launched our app last month, and then I was 50% product for about a month where I was really deep into it and spending a lot of time making sure it met the requirements that we had for our clients, making sure that all the things worked the way they were meant to work, that we could meet the things we said we were going to meet. So I had a deep role in that for about a month where that kind of shifted my prioritization.
Okay. And when we talked, you used a phrase that's a lot of peopling.
There's a lot of peopling.
And I think a lot of founders will relate to that. Talk to me about that.
So it almost feels cliche at this point to say that you have to work your network. But the reality is, especially in a startup, the people who who you already connect to are the people who are most likely to be your champions. And in the LER space, so we often think about spaces by vertical, hey, this is education. The education space has these people, workforce has these people, so on and so forth. But really in the LER space, every vertical is a potential partner. And so no one in your network is out of the space that you might want to be in. They're either, so that because LER touches education and work and quality of life for people and all of those pieces that surround it, I am talking to, this week alone, I am talking to groups who are supporting veterans transition into the workplace, other vendors who are enabling the transition of skills and credentials, the Jobs for the Future, which is a nonprofit out of DC, Education Design Lab, also a nonprofit out of DC, engaging with folks out of the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, engaging with workforce boards this week. I saw in a number of different groups there, as well as one of our larger clients that's in the education space. And then we are, to round that all out, we're also engaging with recruiting companies right now to think about the next step in our growth. So all of those are different avenues of contact and peopling that I did at some point or another in this week.
Wow. And you did that in 40 hours. That's
I
a
mean,
lot.
as best as I can contain
More
it to
than
40
40.
hours. Yes.
More than 40. Okay.
Yeah, you have to be targeted. You have to be really strategic about
Wow.
it so that you don't
Sure.
lose your personal life when you're doing this. So
Right. And that's for our listeners who may not be familiar with the learning and employment records ecosystem. Can you give us a simple explanation of why Gobekli exists and what they're trying to solve?
absolutely. So a little bit of origin story to share that. So our founder, Eddie Doan, this is his second startup, and he is a dyslexic homeschool kid from Washington State who decided he wanted to graduate early, told his parents at the age of 13 he was going to be an entrepreneur, and they were like, that's great, but you can't do that without a diploma, basically. And if you can figure out how to do it early, go for it. And so he worked with the Department of Education, Washington State, to rework a system so he could provide evidence, and graduated at the age of 15. From there, they were like, great, that's wonderful, but you're too young to go to big kids school. So they sent him to community college and said, you can go to community college for a little bit, get some more, like, you're still 15, so let's figure this out. Went through, got a degree in techno-human feedback loops. That's the focus of his study, and then ultimately went out, got sales experience, and then launched a group called Marketeering Group, which was it was the number one ranked marketing agency on Google for a little while, where it was building diverse marketing teams at scale for any organization that needed marketing. And in that company, as they were scaling, they were creating teams on the fly for these projects. So they had talent, and they needed to figure out which talent to put on which projects. And so they started in that company a project called Project Gobekli, which was about trying to basically create a skills inventory for the existing teams so that they could easily go, okay, I need this, and then put them on the teams necessary. And very quickly figured out that scale for what they had built internally was 200 teams. At that point, the data broke down. Through a number of different things, Danny ultimately sold that company, but when he sold it, he took Project Gobekli with him. Spent 6 months driving around the country. He and his wife sold their house, packed up an Overlander, lived out of the back of it, drove around the country, and met with people in towns all over the country. And the goal was basically, tell me how you're fixing this. Like, I tried to fix it in my marketing agency, and we hit a problem. What are you doing to address this problem in your company? And from all of that came Gobekli as it is today. So learn a number of really key things. One, people need to be able to verify and validate their skills, and they need to be able to do it in a way that they can pull it out of their pocket. They need to have so many, one of my favorite things to point out to people, because nobody thinks about it, is you don't own your work record. You can't verify your employment yourself unless you hand over a pay stub.
True.
And so there's nothing you can do to prove it otherwise. And so that fact that you don't own your own work record is a good example of when you're going out to try and prove that you have a certain skill set. How do you prove it without a lot of extra work? So Danny took that, started trying to address that problem, moved up to Boston where he's located now, and got connected with our CTO, Coyote, who is out of MIT. And he was part of Tim Berners-Lee's SOLID project, which is a project focused on self-sovereign data. So how do we make sure that people can control the data that they put out? How do we make sure they have the ability to revoke it safely and manage it in ways that is completely opposite of the current paradigm, but that adds a much greater level of security.
Wow.
Together, they built Gobekli, and then I joined 2 years ago when they were ready to really move from a concept to let's get this out into the market. And so December, we launched Talent Pass, which is the first half of our products. It is an LER wallet. So to come back around to the learning and employment records ecosystem, when you hear the term learning and employment records or LER, there's two things they're actually being referred to. One is a technical standard. So an LER is a standardized data format. And then the ecosystem is the tools and organizations that surround the use of that format to enable interoperability. We talk about it as a new layer of the internet. effectively, if you want to think about it that way. This is Web3 technology. And so what it's going to do is it's going to start to underpin how we exchange information about ourselves in a way that's valid, in a way that addresses the influx of AI that we're seeing right now of bad information that can't be validated, in a way that puts the control in the hand of the individual and says you are in charge of your information. In that ecosystem, there's a number of players. There's educators, there's employers, there's the government entities that need to validate, there's the folks issuing credentials, confirming skills. We sit in the individual space. So our goal is to fill the gap that says we need to put the power in the hands of people to be able to work within this ecosystem in a way that is not difficult, that empowers them to work with any entity that they need to, doesn't limit them to say you must work within these walled gardens because this is where we have it already, and that really enables them to really go from where they are to the next step in economic development for themselves, in growth, and whatever that might mean in terms of their skills. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to crack a rather large problem, but we think that we are the key to being able to do that well so that everyone can benefit from it.
Thank you for that great explanation.
Thank you.
So why do resumes still dominate hiring despite being hundreds of years old, right?
Yeah, you're speaking my language, Mark. So there's so many different ways to approach that question. One of the things we find ourselves talking a lot about right now is that talent is still an analog supply chain. So if you think about any supply chain, any movement of goods and services, they've been modernized. Technologies have come in to make it easier. We've got workflows and logistics and all of that stuff. Talent doesn't have that. The reality is that hiring is still using old modalities, and that's because hiring is still, as it should be, very people-centric. We need to know that the people we're going to work with are people that we like. They're going to fit us not just in terms of ability, but in terms of culture, in terms of a lot of intangibles. And so the difference between a talent supply chain and, say, logistical supply chain is the goods and services that we're measuring, the people and the talent that they bring with them, are often very intangible things to measure. They're difficult to consume. They're coming from places that are outside of formal education many times. The real talent that we bring to the table, yes, formal education, solidly, I'll always be there to say you should get your education's worth it. But when you leave the classroom, you don't stop learning. You don't stop acquiring skill. Skill doesn't work that way. And so we get skills from caring for children or aging parents. We get skills from managing our family calendar. We get skills from being athletes or artists or volunteers or all of these things that happen outside of education and work. So I think the reason the resume still works, and I say this with significant quotations around it, is because it acts as a stand-in for true talent. We're using it saying, oh, well, at one point you could say if you had a 4-year degree, you could guarantee a certain amount of skill. At least we thought that at the time. We can argue whether that was true then, but it's more and more untrue now because we have the internet, because AI, because we can go out and get the skills we need without a degree frequently. It's not as hard as it used to be. It's not as simplified and streamlined as it used to be. But what we see is employers who've always used this process, and so they go, oh, well, a 4-year degree, that's how I'm going to confirm. And they lose tons of talent because they're using as a filter, effectively. Well, does this person have a 4-year degree? And tell me that the service member who has done the equivalent of a 4-year degree worth of work deserves to be filtered out of that search because they didn't get a degree from a university. That's where we are right now. And so the resume fails us because it simply doesn't function as a good record for true talent.
That's great, Beth. Thank you for that explanation. And you mentioned there's two sides of the platform. There's Talent Pass for individuals.
Yes.
And then there's the organizational side that you're now prototyping, right?
That's correct. That's Talent Sync.
Talent Sync. Okay.
Yes.
Tell us about those two sides.
Okay. A lot of times in the LER ecosystem, we like to joke kindly that the LER ecosystem has a chicken and an egg problem, right? In order to have good validated data, you have to have people who are capturing good validated data. In order for people to want to capture good validated data, they need someone who wants to consume that data, which means we have a two-sided problem, or a supply and demand problem, if you want to think about it that way. The supply is people and their skills. The demand is employers. The demand is the folks who are utilizing that skill. From our perspective, people often go into the workplace and into the job having a very poor ability to articulate what they're good at. Not that they have poor abilities. They have great abilities, but oftentimes their ability to explain it well in the structures we have is low. So that's where Talent Pass comes in. And we built that first because we need people to gain that skill, to be able to go through and say, actually, let me tell you why I am a good storyteller and why that's relevant to this job. Let me tell you not just why I am a good Python developer, but why my background in Python and a teamwork thing that I do over here in my athletic team in my free time pair together. Why is that relevant? Why does that matter? Because I can find Python developers that can articulate well to a non-developer audience is a much harder thing to nail down. So Talent Pass is designed to help people bring together all of their skills, all of their talent, both the credentialed skills, which is we're talking badges, certificates, licensure, all of those types of things, and the uncredentialed, unstructured skills, so they can present them to an employer. Now, that sounds great in practice, right? We'd love to be able to do that, but when an employer gets that and they're working in the old system of resumes and applicant tracking systems and HRIS systems, those are still very prevalent. Need to have tools that enable them to utilize the information well. And that's where Talent Sync comes into this, where we say, look, we have helped people capture their data in a way that is in a framework you can engage with. And now we're going to give you tools to look at it and use it well. The big crossover that I like to talk about, although there's several pieces of the two apps that are complementary. One of the big ones is the talent tree. And so in our app, we've built basically a super taxonomy that allows you to apply any framework to skill and talent that is appropriate for the opportunity you're engaging with. What it allows in Talent Sync is for an employer to say, I need to look at my whole team and all of their talent in one place, overlaid in one structure, and identify misplaced talent to say, hey, I'm looking for someone who can speak Spanish because we're looking at Spanish language acquisition in this space over here, or we're expecting to have, we're broadening out into another region. Or, I'm looking for someone who's got a leadership skill that I don't see right now. And they might find it in that it's just not in the team they're looking at. They might just need to be looking at the company as a whole. So having that overview allows them to see misplaced talent. It also allows them to align their hiring in meaningful ways. Instead of saying, I think what I'm going to need is this, they can say, actually, this is the gap we have. I can see it. I can look at my team, I can identify where the gap is, and I can either upskill my team because that might be more cost effective, or I can hire for new talent. So it's creating this ability for a two-way exchange of information. Employers exchanging information to individuals about what they've done well so that they can continue to grow and expand and be better employees and have better experiences economically for themselves, and individuals sending to their employers, here's my information to better streamline the way we work. And so that's where Talent Sync comes in, is that side of let's make sure that we have parlance here in a way that's meaningful for everyone, that's ethical, that is that's secure, but that also really provides clarity in spaces that a lot of the time we're not thinking about right now.
Okay. So why is transparency such a core value in Gobekli's design philosophy?
Man, a number of reasons. I mean, a lot of the systems that are not working right now in workforce development, in hiring, are not working because of a kind of what I would call a reversed approach to what we should be thinking. Instead of saying, I, the employer, want to have an open dialogue with someone who might be working with me, we get a lot of, I, the employer, want to be protective of what I have. Understandable. You don't want to put yourself in a position as an employer to have your talent stolen. You don't want to upskill people and have them leave. But then there's the flip side argument. If you upskill people and they leave, and they're leaving in droves, you need to pause and question why that's happening. Like, for transparency to work, it needs to be a two-sided coin. Yes, individuals need to be clear and truthful in what they send you about their skill, and we want to help them do that. But you as an employer need to be realistic and truthful about what you're going to ask them to do with that skill. You're going to need to be realistic about what they're going to receive as a response for their work, what compensation, what upskilling opportunities are available to them. If it's just about a one-way exchange of I get talent and you get whatever I decide to give you in the end, it's not a fair system. And we end up in the problems we're in now, where where it takes 600 applications to get to a job. I talked to someone, a really, really cool individual who is a recruiter out of the UN Refugee Agency a couple weeks ago, and she pointed out that her spouse they had tracked it on a spreadsheet, took 500 applications to get to an interview. That interview is the one that got the job, but it was 500 applications. That's untenable for the average person, and it's unmanageable for companies hiring.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Beth. One thing you mentioned very candidly was Gobekli's just now entering the scaling phase.
Yep, we're at the very beginning of it.
What feels the hardest right now about that transition?
Oh, man, it's funny because even since we talked, I feel like my answer to this has changed a little bit. So there's a couple things that stand out to me. When you're in this space of transitioning as a startup, it transitions the way you engage with VCs, with fundraising, for good reason, because fundraising is a very structured process. So like you have to go through that reasonable process. But also, if you have, in our case, we've bootstrapped the first tool launch. What we found in that process is as we got to the levels that a lot of the potential funders were looking for, they went, well, but your tool's further along now. So now we're looking at, and that changed the goalpost for us because now we need to be in a different modality of thinking about fundraising. It's been tricky to navigate that while still having momentum. And so that remains a continued, like, how do we do this? How do we make sure we can still fund what we're doing in a way that's meaningful, but still addressing all of these pieces? That continues to be a struggle. And I think that's going to be true of most startups, that at some point or another, fundraising is something they're doing. It's important. It's valuable. And also, as you go along, you might get ahead of where you think you need to be and then suddenly find yourself looking at a completely different type of fundraising than you were a minute ago. And that kind of having to really rework and rethink the messaging and the projections and the everything in real time, that's a lot of work. Companies spend months on projections. And we're looking at sometimes having to go, okay, in the next week, can we rewrite our projections based on a different type of fundraising?
So what metrics are investors mostly focused on?
Oh, gosh. Okay, so there's a couple different things. The first 10,000, that's not the right word. The first set of reoccurring clients. So not just a client who's signed up and then we're out, but like clients who are going to renew. So, and there's I'd have to go back and look at the exact dollar amount that we're being asked for, but there's a dollar amount like, hey, we want you to get to X amount of recurring revenue. And then we also have, as one of the metrics we're seeing is not just signups. So like with Talent Pass, that's a free tool. And so for us, it's not, the money generating tool is going to be Talent Sync. There's a connection between the two that's in the space between that. We expect that we're going to be able to launch a really early MVP of Talent Sync by March, April. But so for Talent Pass, the metric is about signups and retention. So not just, hey, how many people downloaded it, but how many people downloaded it and are still using it. And so that's the big one there. And we're looking at, we look at that in sets. We'd like to get to our first, we want to get to our first 1,500 users. Then we want to get to our first 10,000 users. Then we want to get our first two. So there's a couple different things. And that's where all the partnership comes in. Because a lot of the partnership in what we're doing is going to be the thing that moves those needles.
Yes, it does. It sounds like partnership's going to be a big part of it. Right.
Yes.
And as you look ahead, 12 to 24 months, from a police perspective in the industry, what do you think needs to change for hiring and talent mobility to truly improve?
So that's a great question. So there's a couple elements that I think are important. We need to all agree that we don't need to own our own kingdoms. So, and I say this to mean, if you really want a good talent system, a good supply chain, all of the parts have to work well. And that means all of the friction needs to be addressed. So where there's friction that we see, and one of the things that we think a lot about is in the market right now, there's about 6 to 10 credential wallets, 6 that are really out there and running. It's not a huge space, but we all need to be able to be interoperable, because there's no part of me that thinks that every human being in the United States is going to use Talent Pass. That's unrealistic. I'd love it. That sounds wonderful. If everyone would like to do so, let's go there. But that's not how the United States functions in these kinds of spaces. We don't mandate technologies like that. And so we're going to see folks who have a wallet because their employer wanted it, and a wallet because their education provider wanted it, and they
Yeah.
might not be the same thing. So for us, interoperability, making sure these technologies, those needles have to move. Technologies exist. They're there. They exist. We have, now it's like, now we need to go, okay, we got to stop disagreeing about terminologies or worrying about, well, but if they can put their information in your wallet, they'll leave my wallet, and start saying, why do they have my wallet? Why are they using my tool? And allowing for that interaction and focusing on those things as opposed to saying, well, but I can't afford to lose somebody. If that's the case, same problem we have with the employers and hiring. You need to ask the question, why is that? What are you not doing that you should be doing? So yeah, that there is a lot of movement in that direction, but in the next 12 to 24 months, those pieces need to break down. The other side of it is there is a massive outflux of funding from the federal government right now that is related to all of this space. For example, there is a grant out of the Department of Labor called Youth Build. That's the minimum grantee is $1 million, and they have 98 million allocated to it. That is specifically addressing youth pre-apprenticeship programs. Nothing in that says LER ecosystem, but for good youth pre-apprenticeships programs to be done, they need to have the skills frameworks underneath, which is what the LER ecosystem brings. So there's all of these pieces that need to work together where funding is coming, and it needs to actually not just be so separate. It needs to be like, hey, we got pre-apprenticeship programs over here. We're going to do pay for performance in apprenticeship programs over here. Maybe those things need to talk. And we need to stop creating artificial barriers that don't need to be there so that these systems work well. So that's the other, there's some friction in, how the funding is happening and who's getting it and are we enabling everyone? And there's some friction in making sure that we're not creating, I like to call them walled gardens. So we're not creating walled gardens and creating a pay-to-play model. Because, if we're really in this to support workforce, I don't know anyone in their best circumstance who wants to pay for a tool when they're job hunting. Let alone folks in their worst circumstances who their next question is, how am I going to pay my bills and feed my kids? We can't create these spaces that they have to pay into in order to get the benefit. We're just creating inequality.
Right. Okay. And what would success look like for a Gobekli in 18 to 24 months?
Oh, that's a great question too. We would love to be the primary hiring and talent management tool for small to medium-sized businesses in 18 to 24 months, being entirely honest. There's a lot of tools out there, and they're really geared towards large entities for good reason. That's who has the money to do them. There's Workday and companies like that. They do great things, but they're big, and they're really not addressing what a small to medium-sized business needs because they get priced out of the market. So we'd love to be in a space where we can say, look, you've got a head count of anywhere between 5 and 200. We have a tool that's developed in a way that's cost effective for you, that can help you not just hire, but manage your talent and manage it well. So that's for us. That's where I think our success really comes in. The other side of that is we'd love to see viral adoption of Talent Pass ultimately. We'd like to see folks go, wait a second, this changes the conversation, and start to just pull it out and go, let me try it. It's free, let me try it, and see what happens there. It's a process. We got to figure out how we get in front of those people and start finding those folks who are willing to try. And that's where the partnerships come in.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So where can people learn more about Gobekli?
Sure. If you're looking for company information, gobekli.io. So that's GOBELKI.io. If you just Google Gobekli, you're going to get Gobekli Tepe, which is the UNESCO Heritage Site. Which is great. By all means, check it out. It's very cool. But yes, Gobekli.io is our website. If you are looking for Talent Pass, the tool specifically, that's talentpass.io. And you can also find that on Apple and Google Play. So the Apple App Store and Google Play if you want to download it. We're also at a couple events. I'll be at the Digital Credentials Summit in Philly next month. So if folks are in Philly around that time, please come on out. I'd love to chat and say hi. Those are the main ways that I can think of. We're also, we're on LinkedIn. You can find our company and follow us there. And we're always all of us, myself, our CEO, Danny Doan, and our CTO, Kere Zike, we're all happy to connect with folks at any time.
Okay. All right, Beth. Thank you again. This was a very thoughtful conversation. And I appreciate your honesty and the human-centered approach you're
Thank you.
bringing to such a complex problem space.
Thank you, Mark. I
And
appreciate that.
and everyone listening, thank you for joining us on what successful software startups do differently. And we'll see you next time. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.